Hello and welcome. Let's start talking today. Let's start talking today about the urinary system. When we talk urinary system, a urinary system we'll see is going to be made up of a few different organs. Here we can see those few different organs being depicted, and being depicted in relation to, you can see a whole bunch of other organs and structures there as well. So here we have a good view, and here we also have a very good view also. So what we'll do first is we'll go through the different components here, and then we'll relate everything to the other structures there as well. So when we talk urinary system is made up of, you can see your kidneys, your two kidneys, your urinary bladder, the ureters that are found in between the kidneys and the urinary bladder, your ureters, and your urethra. So you've got kidneys, two ureters, leading to one bladder, the urinary bladder, helping to basically flow this, move this urine forward to then the urethra, which will then, we'll see, expel the urine from the body. So kidneys, ureters, bladder, and urethra. Kidneys, ureter, bladder. You may have heard of that with the X-ray, KUB, kidneys, ureter, bladder, and that's usually what they're looking at in this abdominal kind of pelvic X-ray that they'll do there. So here now, these are the organs again of the urinary system. Now when we go through and we talk urinary system, what we're going to do is we'll focus on the structures one by one. So we'll start off with the kidneys. Let's start with the kidneys. When we talk about the kidneys, first let's talk function of the kidneys. The kidneys we'll see have a few functions. Okay, and we'll go through and we'll check those out. And here we could see now these kidneys, the ureters, the bladder, and the urethra from an anterior view. And here you can see also the suprarenal glands above them. Okay, we would have then the liver up in here, right? And here you can see the blood vessels. We're going to go through those major blood vessels. We've got the abdominal aorta, the inferior vena cava. And then here we can see some muscles, right? We've gone through the iliacus and the psoas major muscles, the iliopsoas muscles. And here you can appreciate then basically how the bladder is found in that pelvis. So from this posterior view, now you can appreciate how the kidneys are going to be found in that, in basically this lumbar region. We're going to go through, we're going to check out the lower thoracic lumbar and higher lumbar region. And then here you can see the bladder and how it's found in the pelvis. So two kidneys, two ureters, bladder, and a urethra. So I told you kidneys are going to have several functions. First function we're going to go through, we're going to talk about, we're going to check out is urine formation. Urine formation. Urine formation is going to occur when the kidneys filter fluid from the blood. When the kidneys filter fluid from the blood, this is going to allow them to remove toxins, metabolic waste, and even excess ions. And this will allow these waste, the metabolic toxins, the waste, the excess ions, to leave the body as urine, while the kidneys return needed substances back to the blood. So they're going to filter fluid from the blood, and this will allow these components to be removed while returning needed substances back to the blood. So filter blood plasma and excrete waste, we can see there. Regulate blood volume and blood pressure. We've talked about how that happens. You should be able to explain that. Regulate osmolarity. We've talked a little bit about that. Regulate electrolyte and acid-base balance. Secrete erythropoietin for red blood cell production. We've seen that. Help synthesize vitamin D. Right? We've talked about this. Along with this, there's two other systems that are going to be involved there as well. Helps to clear hormones and drugs, so basically detoxifying free radicals also. And then helps support blood glucose levels during starvation. So gluconeogenesis, producing hormones, right? Erythropoietin, renin, metabolizes vitamin D to its active form, right? So all these basic functions you've got here. Now, where are these kidneys found? You can see they're found located lying in a retroperitoneal position between the dorsal body wall and the parietal peritoneum. They're found in the superior lumbar region, extending approximately from T12 down to L3. Extending approximately from T12 down to L3. You can see the right kidney is slightly lower compared to the left. The right kidney is slightly lower compared to the left, and that's going to be because we have our liver found here on the right side. That will be occupying a good amount of space there, and that causes this kidney to be found in a position slightly lower compared to the left kidney. Now, when we talk about the size and the shape of the kidneys, when we talk about the size, the kidneys weigh about 150 grams, about 5 ounces. When you talk about their dimensions, the kidneys are going to be about 12 centimeters long. They're about 12 centimeters long. They're about 6 centimeters wide. About 6 centimeters wide and 3 centimeters thick. About the size of a large bar of soap. About the size of a large bar of soap. And when you talk shape, they're bean shaped. They're kidney bean shaped. And you can see that there very nicely. Now, when we talk about the external anatomy of the kidneys, the external anatomy, you can see here the lateral surface is convex, while the medial surface is concave. And the medial surface has a vertical cleft to it, and the vertical cleft is called the renal hilum, which we'll see is going to lead us to the renal sinus. Here in this location, you can see you have the ureters and the blood vessels entering and exiting basically the organ, the kidneys. Now, atop each kidney, we can appreciate the adrenal glands. So you've got 2 adrenal glands, or suprarenal glands, we referred to them as well. Suprarenal, above the kidneys. Now, when we talk about the renal hilum, so here you'll see it's going to contain the ureter, the renal blood vessels, the lymphatics, okay, and the nerves, basically all these important organs we're going to see here in relation to the organs. Now, when we go through and we talk about these kidneys, here you can appreciate now some supporting tissue in relation to these kidneys as well. Now, the supporting tissue we have here, so when we talk about the supporting tissue, you can see the supporting tissue is going to be made up of various factors. So here we're able to appreciate that supporting tissue right in this picture here and also right in this picture here. What we'll do is we'll move over to this picture here. In this picture now we can appreciate the 3 layers which are going to be surrounding each kidney and make up the supporting tissue. First, we have here what we call the fibrous capsule. The fibrous capsule. When we talk about the fibrous capsule, you can see the fibrous capsule is going to be the innermost layer. It's a transparent capsule, and it prevents infection from spreading to the kidneys. Then we have the perirenal fat capsule. The perirenal fat capsule is exactly what its name says. It's going to be a fatty mass that surrounds and cushions the kidneys against blows. Then we have the renal fascia. The renal fascia, now you can see we've got an anterior and a posterior component. Now there's renal fascia as the outer layer, and it's a layer of dense, fibrous connective tissue. It's a layer of dense, fibrous connective tissue, and it anchors the kidneys and the adrenal glands to the surrounding structures. Now in the cats, you'll be able to go through basically all of this. You can see the peritoneum and those layers, and you'll be able to appreciate that when we get to the renal system in relation to the cats, and that's when you'll be able to remove that, and you'll be able to actually dissect out the adrenal glands there as well. Up till now, you've just been feeling them and seeing them there, and once you actually look at them and you see them, you'll see the very, very, really tall, tiny structures. So here now, when we look at the internal anatomy, let's move over to then this picture right in here, or we can see this picture right in here. Now, here we can see the frontal section. This is going to review to us basically three distinct regions, we can say. We've got here first the renal cortex, and then we've got the renal medulla, and then we've got the renal pelvis. So let's go through and let's talk first the renal cortex. The renal cortex is the most superficial region. You can see here it's light in color, the most superficial region, light in color, and it has a granular appearance to it. It has a granular appearance to it. And you'll be able to appreciate that there with the cow kidneys. You'll be able to see it very nicely. We don't dissect out cat kidneys because the cat kidneys are really, really small structures, and trying to appreciate the internal anatomy inside is just almost non-existent, and so we supplement that with cow kidneys. Now we can see the renal medulla. The renal medulla is the darker reddish brown region you see just deep to the cortex. And this renal medulla, you can see it exhibits cone-shaped tissue masses that we're going to refer to as renal pyramids. These renal pyramids are cone-shaped tissue masses. They have a base and they have an apex to them. The base is facing the cortex. The apex, or the papilla, you can see, is facing then that pelvis. Now, when we talk about the nephrons are mostly found in the cortex. When we go through and we look at the actual nephron, we'll be able to appreciate that there. You see the majority of the nephron is going to be found in the cortex. And we'll have a couple of parts basically dipping down into, you can see the medulla. So then here we've got the renal columns. The renal columns are going to be found as inward extensions of cortical tissue. You can see that extending downward. And the renal columns are found separating the pyramids from one another. From then the medulla, we can move down into the pelvis. Now when we talk about the pelvis, the renal pelvis is this funnel-shaped tube-type structure. You can see one side of this renal pelvis, it's continuous with the ureter. And the other side, it's continuous with the minor and the major calyces, which are going to be found surrounding, you can see the papillae. When we talk renal pelvis, so minor calyces, 2 to 3 come together to give rise to one major calyx. And then a couple of these major calyxes, a few of these major calyces will come together, and they're going to give rise then to the pelvis. The pelvis then continues as the ureter. We saw the ureter in that initial image there, and you saw how it was making its way down to the bladder. So major calyces, 2 to 3 branching extensions of the pelvis. And the minor calyces, you can see even more or further branches of the major calyces. And they're surrounding the papillae. So when urine is going to make its way out, it's going to get basically making its way out of this papilla there, and then it's going to get basically dropped into the minor calyx, major calyx, and then the pelvis, and then into the ureter, then the ureter, the bladder, urethra, and toilet. Right, not the tree, the grass, right? Civilized. So here then, when we move through, we can see we want to get down to the nephron here now. When we talk about the nephron, in order for us to reach the nephron, we're going to follow the blood supply and the arterial supply basically in, and then we'll follow the venous supply all the way out. So here when we go through and we talk, then here we can use this image here, we could use this image right inside of here. Now here we could see right off the bat, we've got first our renal arteries. The renal artery now is going to make its way further into then the kidneys at the renal hilum, we said. So told you here you can appreciate all of these structures. And then we talk nerves, right? They'd be found surrounding this artery and basically making their way through and all of that. You can check all that out there. So here you can see now the renal artery, as it makes its way further into the kidneys, it's going to start to branch and divide. Now here when it starts to branch and divide, it's going to give rise first to the segmental arteries. These segmental arteries then, you can see are going to pass and they're going to further divide and they're going to make their way into the columns. And here you can appreciate now those arteries, segmental arteries, are going to become the interlobar arteries. These interlobar arteries now are going to continue deeper into the kidneys, even moving further into the kidneys. And as they move further up into the kidneys, here you can see they're going to start to curve. And when they curve now, they're going to become known as the arcuate arteries. Now here you can see the arcuate artery making its way up and again making its way further up into the kidney. And here then it's going to become the cortical radiate artery. The cortical radiate arteries now are going to have, you can see all these branches coming off from them as well, making sure that the cortex is fully supplied. So here what do we have? We said the majority of the nephron is going to be found here. Now the cortical radiate artery is going to lead us to then, you can see the afferent arteriole. The afferent arteriole is going to continue on then to form the glomerulus. To form the glomerulus. Here you can appreciate that glomerulus. The glomerulus now is going to be in connection with the nephron. So here's the initial part of the nephron, and here you can see they're in contact with each other. We can move over further to this picture in here, and you can see blood flow is going to be into that afferent arteriole, right? Into the afferent arteriole, then it flows into the glomerulus, and whatever needs to be filtered out is going to get filtered out in here, and whatever gets returned is going to be returned back into the circulation thanks to the efferent arteriole, which then is going to collect blood from other arterioles as well, the capillaries there, more specifically speaking. And here we could see that blood is going to make its way then back out of the nephron. Here you can see the rest of those capillaries. So once this blood makes its way into the efferent arterioles become the peritubular capillaries, the vasa recta, peritubular capillaries then, and they're all going to then empty. You can see here they're all going to empty then, and they empty right into the cortical radiate vein. Now the cortical radiate vein then is going to receive this blood, and it's going to circulate that blood then and put it into, you can see with the arcuate veins. The arcuate vein then is going to pass this blood back to the heart, and on its way back now to the heart, it becomes, you can see the arcuate is going to become the interlobar vein. The interlobar vein then continues through the kidneys, making its way out, and it becomes the renal vein. From the renal vein, then we go into the inferior vena cava, and we'll pick up from there when we get to circulation and we talk cardiovascular system. So let's look at what we have then right up in here. So this is where all the magic occurs. So let's go here. You can see one idea of the area there, this is all the cortical region. So these are cortical nephrons. These are juxtamedullary nephrons. You can see we have a couple of different types. So let's talk nephrons. Nephrons now are going to be the structural and the functional unit of our kidneys. Each kidney contains over 1 million of these tiny blood processing units, which are going to carry out the process that form the processes that are going to form urine. So we saw the glomerulus first here. The glomerulus is a tuft of capillaries. It's a tuft, a bunch of capillaries. And then surrounding those capillaries is you can see the renal corpuscle. Or basically, more specifically speaking, we're going to see the glomerular capsule. So again, the glomerulus along with this capsule make up what we call the renal corpuscle. So here you've got the renal corpuscle, and then the rest here you can see you've got the tubule. We've got the renal tubule. So let's go through. You can see the glomerulus. You've got the renal tubule. Okay? And then the glomerular capsule surrounding that glomerulus. So let's talk renal corpuscle. When we talk renal corpuscle, okay, so a nephron is going to consist of two major components. Okay, that glomerulus you can see, and then basically the capsule along with the tubule component we've got here. So here now, when we go through and we talk about the renal corpuscle, so the renal corpuscle is going to be made up of, you can see these two parts. So you can see that there, and then here we could see that being depicted as well. So the renal corpuscle, and then the tubule, major components of the nephron. So here then let's talk this glomerular capsule. Now the glomerular capsule, you can see, okay, is going to be made up of two parts. You're going to have two parts there. You've got a parietal layer and you've got a visceral layer. Parietal layer and visceral layer. So here, the parietal layer right outside, you've looked at that in the beginning of the semester. And then the visceral layer is going to be the layer right on top of here. And there's that visceral layer in greater detail. So here you can see you've got that glomerulus. It's got all these little openings in it. Those openings are going to allow these different components to make their way through. And we can't just allow any and everything to make its way through. So to help prevent that from occurring, we've got these little cells on top of them, podocytes, which have these little foot-like processes. So here you can see those podocytes in greater detail. Same thing being basically, you can see now, here's another part basically being depicted here. That glomerulus in greater detail is what we're looking at here. Okay, so you can't see those podocytes that well. That's why you can see them here. And that's what you're seeing depicted here in this picture. Look at all the little foot-like processes, all helping to block off those tiny little openings. And that's what you're seeing right in here. So down here is the basement membrane, and on the other side is that fenestrated endothelium of that glomerulus. Now, here you can see everything basically in relation to each segment. So you've got to know that histology basically there for each of these different segments as well. So you can see we've checked that out. We talk PCT, proximal convoluted tubule now, the next segment we're able to check out. So this tubule system now is basically forming, and you can see here you got the PCT, proximal convoluted tubule. And when you talk about the histology, you can appreciate now here the cells, and we move down into the next segment, the loop of Henle. You can see the loop of Henle has a descending and an ascending limb. The descending limb is made up of basically just a thin segment, while the ascending limb is made up of a thin and a thick segment. So here you can see the thin segment. Here we can appreciate then, you can see very nicely. And then as we move back up now, we move up this loop of Henle to the DCT, the distal convoluted tubule. Now we talk distal convoluted tubule. Okay, here we're going to be able to appreciate the histology in relation to the distal convoluted tubule. So you can see we're going cuboidal columnar, right? Simple squamous, so we're moving all around. And then we move through the DCT and we move up into the collecting ducts. The collecting ducts you can see receive basically many DCTs. We talk about the collecting duct, now you can see the structure of the collecting duct. Very important you understand each segment, because that's how you'll be able to understand the physiology. So you have to go through every segment and understand that detail there. So we've got all the different parts there. And then we've got the papillary duct, basically, that's going to be found as the merger of several collecting ducts. So renal corpuscle. Now we can see from here the peritubular capillaries. The peritubular capillaries, they arise from the efferent arteriole. They arise from the efferent arteriole. That's draining the glomeruli. And these capillaries, they cling, you can see, closely to these adjacent renal tubules. They're going to empty into nearby venules, as I mentioned. And then we've got basically the different segments there we talked about as well. So coming, nice view here, we can appreciate now. Next, what we call the Juxtaglomerular Apparatus. This Juxtaglomerular Apparatus is going to be found, you can see here, where you have one segment of the nephron loop coming into contact now, you can see here, with our glomerulus, right? And then basically the vessels that are feeding the glomerulus and emptying the glomerulus. So let's look at this juxtaglomerular apparatus in greater detail. It's made up of three parts. You got the macula densa cells. You can see, you're going to be able to appreciate the juxtaglomerular cells surrounding that afferent arteriole. There's smooth muscle cells and then mesangial cells. And we talk mesangial cells. You're going to be able to appreciate the mesangial cells now here in between those two cells. Here you can appreciate that juxtaglomerular apparatus in greater detail now again. So macula densa cells, we can see here, right? We saw the same thing right inside of there. Extraglomerular mesangial cells. Okay, the extraglomerular mesangial cells, mostly in between the two. And then here you can see your granular cells. So I want you to understand the function of each of these cells and how they're going to be involved in relation to blood pressure. Next in here, when we talk this segment right inside of here, more specifically speaking, you can see this segment is the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. You have to make sure you understand that there as well. And also, just by looking, you can appreciate the size difference between the two vessels there as well. And that's telling you more blood is going to make its way in versus the amount that's going to be making its way out. And that's going to help to create a higher pressure gradient inside, which is going to favor filtration, the process of moving things out, moving those substances out into, you can see that, capsular space. So from this capsular space, whatever gets filtered out is going to be passed then into, you can see in detail now, that PCT. The PCT is considered the workhorse of the kidney. The PCT has the ability to reabsorb 50 to 60% of the components that get filtered right out of here. So from that PCT, those substances are going to be then passed along. If they don't get reabsorbed by the peritubular capillaries, they're going to be passed along to the loop. And the same thing if things don't get reabsorbed or other things aren't getting added back in. This will continue, this filtrate will continue to, you can see the ascending limb and then making its way forward. There's going to be basically things that are going to be happening to it all the way through, moving forward to the DCT, and then from the DCT we saw right into the collecting ducts. So as this filtrate is making its way through, you can see how concentrated it gets when it makes its way down here towards that apex. You can see the osmolarity there is going to become about 1200 milliosmolars. And the physiology is going to explain that, but you have to go there with this basic knowledge of understanding what's happening there. So as this filtrate passes through, the osmolarity there you can see is about 300 milliosmolars, gets a little bit more concentrated, even further concentrated, and then you can see it becomes less concentrated as it makes its way back up. And you have to be able to explain that with the physiology when you talk renal physiology. So let's move then to, let's make sure we've got everything taken care of here. Two different types of nephrons. Juxtaglomerular apparatus. Make sure you got that visceral layer there down as well. All right. So let's move forward then. Let's move forward and let's talk about the ureters. Now when we talk about the ureters are slender tubes. They're slender tubes. They're a continuation of the renal pelvis. And their function is that they convey urine from the kidneys to the bladder. They convey urine from the kidneys to the bladder. Their location, they are going to be found, they begin around the level of L2. They begin around the level of L2, and they're going to descend behind the peritoneum. They descend behind the peritoneum. They extend for about 25 centimeters from the kidneys to the bladder behind the peritoneum. Okay, you can see all that retroperitoneal talk I've been doing. They're going to be running obliquely through to enter into the kidneys from the posterior inferior bladder wall. And we can appreciate that then right inside of here very nicely. So right in here you can see how they make their way down. So if I was to draw in here, you've got to be able to understand they're coming down. And when they're coming down, right, they're continuing right down in here to come in and enter at, we said, coming in to enter right here at the posterior inferior bladder wall. Let's look at the internal anatomy of the ureters. The internal anatomy you'll see is made up of 3 layers. Here we can appreciate the 3 layers. You've got first the mucosa. We've talked about the mucosa. You should know everything about that mucosa. We did that in the beginning of the semester. If you don't recall, we talked about transitional epithelium there, and that's what you're able to appreciate. This transitional epithelium is continuous with the kidney pelvis superiorly and the bladder on its inferior medial aspect. And then we can appreciate the lamina propria, connective tissue, support, and then underneath there we've got the muscularis. Muscularis is typical bilayered. You've got a longitudinal and you've got a circular layer. Longitudinal on the inside, circular here on the outside. And then we've got the adventitia right out here, external to the muscularis mucosae. Continuing forward then, so the adventitia covers the ureter's external surface and its typical fibrous connective tissue. Okay, so make sure you know the differences in the different connective tissues there as well. Then we've got the urinary bladder. So let's move over to the urinary bladder. Nice view here, a little better view here. We can talk urinary bladder and you can see it's a smooth, collapsible muscular sac. It's a smooth, collapsible muscular sac. When we talk about the urinary bladder, its function is that it stores urine temporarily. I've had students ask me if they hold their urine, will they get more nutrients? No. Urine formation, all that happened already in the kidneys. Here, it's just all in the process of removing it. So when you talk function of the bladder, it stores urine temporarily. The location, it's found infraperitoneally. Infraperitoneally on the pelvic floor. And here you can see that peritoneum. Infraperitoneally on the pelvic floor, just posterior to the pubic symphysis. just posterior to the pubic symphysis. Now, when you look at and you talk about the internal anatomy, here you can see this internal anatomy of the bladder. It has basically three openings. It has openings for both of the ureters. Number one, we saw one making its way down this way, and the other one does the exact same way. So you got the two ureteric orifices, the openings for the ureters. And then here you can see that bladder neck, the opening basically for the urethra. And then here you've got detrusor muscle. The detrusor muscle is all smooth muscle. It's the muscular layer of this urinary bladder. So that detrusor muscle, the muscular layer, it consists of intermingled smooth muscle fibers. The bladder leads us then to the urethra. Now, when we talk urethra, it's a thin-walled muscular tube. It's lined by pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Near the bladder, it's transitional. And near the external openings, it becomes stratified squamous. So you can see it all changes as it makes its way through. Now, when we talk about the function of the urethra is that it drains urine. It will drain urine, and it drains urine from the bladder, and it'll convey this urine out of the body. Now, when you talk location, it's the urethra is going to be found located, you can see right after the bladder. That's in both females and in males. Now, here let's talk first female urethra. The female urethra is smaller in size compared to the male urethra. It's about 1.5 inches long, and it's tightly bound to the anterior vaginal wall. It's tightly bound to the anterior vaginal wall. The location of the urethra and the size of the urethra, we believe, all increase the chances of UTIs here in the female compared to in the male. So when we get to reproductive, we'll talk more about the location, and you'll be able to see the close proximity in relation to basically the anus. Now, when we talk male urethra, we'll check out there as well. But the female urethra, I want you to be able to appreciate the external urethral orifice. The external urethral orifice is going to be the external opening. It's the external opening. And it's lying anterior to the vaginal opening. It's lying anterior to the vaginal opening and posterior to the clitoris. So anterior to the vaginal opening and posterior to the clitoris to give you a full-on idea of exactly where that's going to be found. Again, you'll be able to see that in the next video when we get into reproductive. Now, when we talk male urethra, the male urethra is longer in size. It has 3 different regions to it. It gets divided into 3 different regions. You have first what we call the prostatic urethra. The prostatic urethra is the region of the urethra that's running through the prostate gland. Then we have the membranous urethra. The membranous urethra then is the sequence, or it's a segment that runs through the urogenital diaphragm. Excuse me. Excuse me. So it runs through the urogenital diaphragm. And it's going to extend for a few centimeters. It extends for a few centimeters from that prostatic urethra to where the penis is going to begin then. So next then we have the spongy urethra. The spongy urethra is the segment of the urethra that's going to be found, running through the penis. Runs through the penis and opens at its tip. Here we have the external urethral orifice as well. The external urethral orifice is the opening at the tip of the penis. It's the opening at the tip of the penis. Now, when we talk external anatomy here, we've got now a couple of sphincters I'd like you to know about. First, we're able to appreciate now what we call the internal urethral sphincter. The internal urethral sphincter is going to be found at the bladder-urethra junction. It's found at the bladder-urethra junction, and you can see that right inside of here. It's the internal urethral sphincter here with the male. And then we've got the same thing here. We've got the internal urethral sphincter with the female as well. So it's at the bladder-urethra junction, and it's a thickening of the detrusor smooth muscle. It's a thickening of the detrusor smooth muscle. So smooth muscle, you should be able to understand what type of control it's under. And then we have the external urethral sphincter. We talk external urethral sphincter, you can appreciate that there with the female. It surrounds the urethra as it passes through the urogenital diaphragm. Same thing here with the male. External urethral sphincter. The external urethral sphincter is going to be formed by skeletal muscle. So same thing, you should know the control there. All right, that concludes the urinary system.